Welcome to LexTalks Legal Topics, simplified your guide to navigating the world of law. Today we're diving deep into a topic that's crucial for all of you out there as Indian law students.
Okay.
Fundamental rights in the Indian Constitution.
Right.
We've got a mix of sources for this deep dive.
Okay.
Legal textbooks, UPSC study guides, and even insights from online resources. So
Good.
gives us a well-rounded perspective.
Yeah, what's fascinating about fundamental rights is that they form the very foundation of Indian democracy. They define the relationship between the individual and the state, shaping the freedoms you enjoy and the limits on government power.
Okay, so let's unpack this to truly grasp these rights.
Right.
I think we need to kind of understand their historical context.
Yeah.
How did they come about?
Well, imagine India during its struggle for independence.
Okay.
Events like the Rowlatt Act of 1919, which allowed imprisonment without trial, really fueled this burning desire
Wow.
for guaranteed civil liberties, for protection against unchecked authority.
It makes sense.
And this demand for a just and fair system played a vital role in shaping the fundamental rights we have today.
So these rights were born out of a struggle for freedom and fairness.
Yeah,
Did any other factors influence their inclusion in the Indian Constitution?
absolutely. India drew inspiration from global examples,
Okay.
like the Irish Constitution, which emphasized social justice, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was a landmark document outlining fundamental freedoms for everyone.
Right.
These influences helped shape the specific rights included in the Indian Constitution.
So it's like a blend of internal struggles and learning from the global stage.
Yeah,
Now, the Indian Constitution lays out 6 fundamental rights,
right.
each encompassing a set of freedoms and protections. Where do we even begin?
Let's start with the cornerstone of individual rights, the right to equality enshrined in Articles 14 to 18. It's all about ensuring that everyone in India has equal standing before the law and equal opportunities.
Okay, that sounds pretty straightforward, but I'm sure there are nuances to consider.
You're absolutely right. Article 14 establishes 2 fundamental principles: equality before the law and equal protection of the laws.
Okay.
This means that no one is above the law or receives special treatment based on their background.
Got it.
It also means that everyone deserves equal protection from arbitrary laws that might favor one group over another.
It's like a legal level playing field, ensuring everyone is treated fairly.
Exactly. And this ties into Article 15, which prohibits discrimination based on religion, race, caste, sex, or place of birth.
Okay.
This means, for example, you can't be denied access to public spaces or opportunities simply because of who you are or where you're from.
So equal access to things like education, employment, or even just entering a shop or restaurant.
Precisely. Now, this is where the concept of affirmative action comes in, which might seem like an exception, but it's actually aimed at leveling the playing field for historically disadvantaged groups.
Okay.
Think of things like reserving seats in educational institutions or government jobs. It's a way to address past inequalities and promote social justice.
So it's like a temporary boost to help certain groups catch up and overcome those historical disadvantages.
Exactly. And then we have Article 16, which specifically focuses on equal opportunities in public employment.
Okay.
Ideally, this means everyone has an equal shot at a government job based on their qualifications, not their background.
That seems fair. Everyone should have a chance to compete based on merit.
In theory, yes. But as with many legal principles, there are complexities and debates surrounding how this plays out in reality. We'll touch on those later.
Okay.
For now, let's move on to 2 other key aspects of the right to equality.
All right, what else falls under this category?
Articles 17 and 18 address 2 significant social reforms. Article 17 abolishes untouchability,
Right.
a practice that historically subjected certain communities to discrimination and segregation. It's a powerful statement that recognizes the inherent dignity of every individual.
A crucial step towards creating a more inclusive and equitable society.
Absolutely. And then we have Article 18, which abolishes titles. This might seem a bit archaic now, but it's about preventing the creation of a social hierarchy based on inherited titles or honors. It's about fostering a more egalitarian society.
So moving away from those feudal systems and embracing the idea that everyone is equal regardless of their lineage.
Exactly. So that's the right to equality. In a nutshell, it lays the foundation for a just and fair society where everyone has an equal chance to thrive.
It's fascinating how these articles kind of work together to create this framework for equality.
Yeah.
But we've only just begun exploring the world of fundamental rights. What's next on our agenda?
Let's dive into another crucial category, the right to freedom laid out in Articles 19 to 22. This is where things get really interesting, as we explore the core freedoms that allow individuals to live with dignity and autonomy.
All right, I'm ready for it. What are these core freedoms?
Article 19 is the heart of this category, guaranteeing 6 fundamental freedoms: speech and expression, assembly, association, movement, residence, and profession.
So this means I can express my opinions freely, gather with others, form groups, travel within India, choose where to live, and pursue the career. These are pretty basic yet essential liberties.
You're right, they are fundamental to a free and democratic society, but there's a catch. These freedoms aren't absolute.
Wait, what do you mean restrictions on freedom?
Yes, but don't worry, it's not as bad as it sounds. The Constitution allows for reasonable restrictions on these freedoms in certain situations. Think about it. Completely unrestricted freedom of speech could lead to chaos and harm.
Okay, I see your point. So you can't just yell fire in a crowded theater if there's no fire, right?
That's a classic example. Restrictions can be imposed for reasons like national security, public order, decency, or to prevent inciting violence. The key is that these restrictions must be reasonable and justified.
So who decides what's reasonable? That seems pretty subjective.
That's where the courts come in. They play a crucial role in interpreting these rights and determining whether restrictions imposed by the government are truly justified and proportionate to the intended goal.
So it's a balancing act between individual freedoms and the broader interests of society, and the courts act as the referees, ensuring that the balance is maintained.
You've got it. And this constant interplay between rights and restrictions has led to some fascinating legal battles and landmark judgments that have shaped the very definition of these freedoms over the years.
We'll definitely have to delve into those cases in another episode, but
Yeah.
for now, let's stick with Article 19. What other aspects of this freedom are there?
Well, we've covered those 6 core freedoms and their limitations, but there's also the concept of freedom of trade, commerce, and intercourse, which is also enshrined in Article 19.
Okay.
This means you have the right to engage in trade and business activities within India without undue restrictions.
So I can set up a shop, sell goods, and travel to different parts of the country for business purposes.
Exactly. It's all about ensuring economic freedom and allowing for the free flow of goods and services across the country.
That makes sense. It's a key part of a functioning market economy.
And as with the other freedoms, there can be reasonable restrictions on trade and commerce, but they must be justified and not arbitrary.
Okay, so Article 19 covers a lot of ground, from basic freedoms of expression and movement to economic freedom.
Yes.
What other articles fall under the right to freedom?
Well, there's Article 20, which protects individuals against arbitrary or excessive punishment. It ensures that you can't be punished for something that wasn't a crime when you did it, can't be tried twice for the same offense, and have the right against self-incrimination.
So no retroactive laws, no double jeopardy, and the right to remain silent, just like we see in movies. These are crucial safeguards for a fair legal system.
Absolutely, they protect individuals from being unjustly targeted or punished by the state.
What about Article 21? I've heard that it's one of the most important and widely debated articles in the Constitution.
You're right. Article 21, the right to life and personal liberty, is a cornerstone of individual rights in India. It's been interpreted broadly by the courts to encompass a wide range of freedoms and protections going beyond just the right to exist.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
It's not just about being alive, it's about living a life with dignity, freedom, and security.
Right.
It includes things like the right to privacy, the right to a clean environment, the right to health care, and even the right to travel abroad.
So it's about ensuring a certain quality of life, not just bare existence.
Exactly. And this expansive interpretation of Article 21 has had a profound impact on Indian law and society, leading to significant advancements in areas like environmental protection, healthcare access, and the rights of marginalized communities.
It's amazing how one article can have such a far-reaching impact.
Yeah.
But let's not forget Article 21A, the right to education.
Right. Article 21A, added later through an amendment, guarantees free and compulsory education for all children between the ages of 6 and 14. It recognizes education as a fundamental right and a cornerstone for individual and societal development.
So it's not just about the right to life. It's also about the right to an education that empowers individuals to reach their full potential.
Precisely. And finally, there's Article 22, which offers protection against unlawful arrest and detention.
Okay.
It lays out rights like the right to be informed of the grounds of arrest, the right to consult a lawyer, and the right to be produced before a magistrate within 24 hours.
So no disappearing into a police station without proper procedures being followed.
Exactly. It's about ensuring due process, accountability, and transparency in the legal system, protecting individuals from arbitrary detention.
It sounds like the right to freedom is this complex web of freedoms, restrictions, and safeguards, all aimed at striking that delicate balance between individual liberty and the needs of society.
You summed it up perfectly, and as we've seen, the courts play a crucial role in interpreting these rights, often having to navigate tricky situations and make tough calls.
So we've covered two major categories of fundamental rights,
Yeah,
equality and freedom.
right.
And it's clear that they're intertwined. You can't have true freedom without equality, and you can't have meaningful equality without freedom.
That's a very insightful observation. These rights aren't isolated. They work together to create a framework for a just and democratic society.
But we're not done yet. There are still four more categories to explore.
Yeah.
What's next on our journey through fundamental rights?
Let's move on to the right against exploitation enshrined in Articles 23 and 24. These articles aim to protect individuals, especially the vulnerable, from being taken advantage of and subjected to inhumane treatment.
Okay, so this is about ensuring that people aren't treated as commodities or forced into situations against their will.
Precisely. Article 23 is very clear. Trafficking in human beings and forced labor are strictly prohibited. This means the law recognizes the inherent dignity of every person and their right not to be exploited or treated as property.
That's a powerful statement, especially in a world where human trafficking and forced labor are still major issues.
It is a significant step towards creating a society where everyone is treated with respect and has the freedom to choose their own path, and this protection applies to everyone regardless of their citizenship.
That's crucial, particularly in a country like India with such a diverse population and kind of porous borders. But I'm curious, are there any exceptions to this rule?
There is one nuance. Article 23 allows the state to impose compulsory service for public purposes,
Oh, yeah.
but with safeguards in place.
So things like mandatory military service, but it can't be used as a loophole for forced labor, right?
Exactly. There are specific guidelines, and it cannot be discriminatory.
Okay.
The key is that it has to be for a legitimate public purpose and not for private gain or exploitation. Now, moving on to Article 24, it focuses specifically on protecting children from exploitation.
Given how vulnerable children are, this seems like a particularly important, right?
Absolutely. Article 24 prohibits the employment of children below the age of 14 in factories, mines, or any hazardous occupation.
So it's about ensuring that children are in school, not working in dangerous conditions that could harm their health and development.
Exactly. The law recognizes that children need to be protected and given the opportunity to get an education, not forced into labor that could jeopardize their future.
Okay, so we've covered the right against exploitation, which aims to safeguard individuals from being trafficked, forced into labor, or subjected to inhumane treatment, especially children. What's next on our list of fundamental rights?
Let's delve into the right to freedom of religion as outlined in Articles 25 to 28. This is a particularly fascinating area as it deals with ensuring religious freedom in a diverse country like India where people of various faiths coexist.
Yeah, I imagine striking that balance between individual religious freedoms and maintaining social harmony can be quite challenging.
Yeah.
How does the Constitution address this?
It is a delicate balance, and the Constitution attempts to navigate this complexity by outlining a set of freedoms and restrictions related to religious practice.
Let's break it down. What does Article 25 guarantee?
Article 25 guarantees freedom of conscience and the right to profess, practice, and propagate religion.
So I have the freedom to choose my own beliefs, worship as I please, and even share my faith with others.
Yes, but remember, like other fundamental rights, this freedom is not absolute. There can be restrictions in the interest of public order, morality, or health.
So if a particular religious practice involves harming others or disrupting public order, the state could intervene.
Exactly. The courts have had to weigh in on numerous cases involving religious practices and determine where the line is drawn between individual religious freedom and the broader interests of society.
Yeah, I can imagine those are some tough judgment calls. What about Article 26? What does that cover?
Article 26 grants religious denominations the freedom to manage their own affairs. This includes things like establishing and maintaining institutions for religious and charitable purposes.
So setting up temples, mosques, churches, or gurudwaras, and running them according to their own beliefs and practices. But again, I assume there are limits to this freedom.
You are correct. While religious groups have autonomy in managing their affairs, this freedom is subject to public order, morality, and health considerations. The state can intervene if there are concerns about activities that might harm others or disrupt public order.
Okay, so freedom to manage religious affairs, but within reasonable bounds. What about Article 27?
Article 27 addresses the issue of religious funding. It prohibits anyone from being forced to pay taxes specifically for the promotion of any particular religion.
So my taxes can't be used to fund religious activities that I don't personally support.
Exactly. It ensures neutrality when it comes to government funding and religion preventing the state from favoring one religion over another.
That makes sense. It's about maintaining that separation between the state and religious institutions when it comes to financial matters. And finally, what about Article 28?
Article 28 deals with the sensitive issue of religious instruction in educational institutions. Essentially, it prohibits forcing students in certain educational institutions from attending religious instruction or worship without their consent.
So no mandatory religious classes in government-funded schools, for example. Students and their parents have the right to choose whether or not they participate in religious activities.
Precisely, it's about respecting individual choices and ensuring that educational institutions don't become platforms for imposing one religion over another.
Okay, so the right to freedom of religion is this fascinating and complex set of freedoms and restrictions, all aimed at balancing individual religious expression with the need for social harmony and preventing discrimination. What's next on our journey through the fundamental rights?
Now let's shift gears and look at the cultural and educational rights, which are particularly relevant in a diverse nation like India. These rights, enshrined in Articles 29 and 30, address the need to protect minority cultures and ensure their right to establish educational institutions.
This seems especially crucial in India, where language, religion, and cultural practices vary so much from region to region. It's about safeguarding that rich tapestry of Indian culture.
Absolutely. Article 29 protects the right of minorities to conserve their language, script, and culture. This means they have the freedom to speak their language, practice their customs, and maintain their traditions without fear of discrimination or suppression.
So it's about respecting and celebrating India's cultural diversity, recognizing that the nation's strength lies in its multicultural heritage.
Exactly. It's about preventing forced assimilation and ensuring that all cultural groups have the space to thrive and contribute to the richness of Indian society. And Article 30 goes hand in hand with this by giving minorities the right to establish and administer their own educational institutions.
So this means they can set up schools that reflect their specific cultural or religious values, ensuring that their children receive an education that aligns with their beliefs and traditions.
Precisely, it's about empowering minority communities to shape the education of their children and pass on their cultural heritage. Of course, the state still has the power to regulate these institutions to ensure they meet certain basic standards.
So it's about balancing the autonomy of minority institutions with the need to ensure quality education for all.
Exactly. It's about finding a middle ground that respects both the rights of minorities and the broader educational goals of the nation. Now we've covered 5 out of the 6 fundamental rights: equality, freedom, exploitation, religion, and culture and education. Let's move on to the final and perhaps most crucial category of fundamental rights.
Okay, what's this all-important final right?
It's the right to constitutional remedies enshrined in Article 32. This is often considered the most important right because it gives you the power to enforce all the other fundamental rights we've been discussing.
So it's like the key that unlocks the entire system, what makes it so powerful.
Article 32 allows citizens to approach the Supreme Court directly if their fundamental rights are violated. This means you have a direct line to the highest court in the land to seek justice and protection if your rights are infringed upon.
That's incredible. It's like a safety valve, a direct channel to the ultimate guardian of the Constitution. But how does this work in practice?
The Supreme Court has the power to issue various writs orders to the government or other authorities to protect or enforce fundamental rights.
What kind of writs are we talking about?
Some of the most well-known writs include habeas corpus, which is used to challenge unlawful detention mandamus, which orders a public official to perform their duty, and certiorari, which is used to review a lower court's decision.
So if any of my fundamental rights are violated, I can go straight to the Supreme Court and they can issue these powerful legal tools to set things right.
In theory, yes. However, navigating the legal system can be complex and time-consuming, even with this right in place.
So it's like having a powerful weapon, but still needing the skill and resources to wield it effectively.
That's a great analogy. While the Constitution guarantees these rights, there are real-world challenges and limitations to their full realization.
This brings up an important point. We've been discussing these rights as they are laid out in the Constitution, but how do they actually play out in the lives of ordinary Indians? Are there situations where these rights might be limited or even suspended?
Those are excellent questions. While fundamental rights are considered sacrosanct, they aren't absolute, and there are circumstances where they can be subject to restrictions or even temporary suspension. One situation is during a national emergency. Article 352 of the Constitution allows the president to proclaim a national emergency if there's a threat to the security of India. During such an emergency, certain fundamental rights can be temporarily suspended.
Whoa, that sounds serious. So, in times of crisis, the government can actually curtail some of our freedoms. Which rights can be suspended, and are there any safeguards in place?
It's important to note that not all fundamental rights can be suspended, even during an emergency.
Okay.
Article 20, which protects against ex post facto laws and double jeopardy, and Article 21, the right to life and personal liberty, cannot be touched, even during an emergency. These rights are considered so fundamental that they are non-derogable.
That makes sense. Even in a crisis, those basic protections against arbitrary punishment and the right to life should remain intact. But what about the other fundamental rights? What happens to those during an emergency?
For the other fundamental rights, the Constitution allows for temporary suspension, but with several safeguards. Firstly, the suspension has to be approved by Parliament. It's not solely at the discretion of the executive branch. This ensures a level of democratic oversight.
So there's a check on the government's power. It's not like they can just declare an emergency and suspend rights on a whim.
Exactly. And secondly, there are limits on how long the suspension can last. It's not indefinite. Parliament has to periodically review and approve the continuation of the emergency and the suspension of rights. This ensures that the situation is being monitored and that the suspension is only in place for as long as it's absolutely necessary.
That's reassuring. It's a system designed to prevent the abuse of power. Are there any other situations besides a national emergency where fundamental rights might be restricted?
Yes, a couple of articles deal with specific situations where restrictions might apply.
Okay.
Article 3, for instance, allows Parliament to restrict or modify the application of fundamental rights for members of the armed forces, police, and intelligence agencies.
That's interesting. Why would there be a need to restrict the rights of those serving in these organizations?
Well, think about the nature of their work. They often operate in highly sensitive environments where discipline, secrecy, and quick decision-making are essential. So there might be limitations on things like freedom of speech association or movement that wouldn't apply to civilians, for example. A soldier might not have the same freedom to criticize their superiors or to form political associations.
Okay, that makes sense. It's about balancing individual rights with the need for order and efficiency within these organizations, especially when national security is at stake. What about the other article you mentioned?
Article 34 deals with martial law. If martial law is imposed in an area, usually due to a breakdown of civilian authority and severe unrest, Parliament can pass laws that indemnify individuals for actions taken to maintain or restore order, even if those actions might technically infringe on fundamental rights.
So in extreme situations where there's widespread chaos and the regular legal system is unable to function, there's a provision to give legal cover to those trying to restore order, even if it means bending the rules a bit.
That's the essence of it. It's a controversial provision, as you can imagine, because it involves a significant curtailment of rights, but it's designed for extraordinary circumstances where swift and decisive action is needed to restore stability.
Okay, it sounds like navigating the legal complexities of fundamental rights during emergencies or under martial law can be a real minefield. It's interesting how the Constitution tries to strike a balance between protecting individual rights and addressing those exceptional situations where the very fabric of the nation might be at risk, now moving away from these exceptional circumstances. Let's talk about something called the basic structure doctrine. It sounds like this doctrine puts some limits on how much the Constitution itself can be changed, even by Parliament.
You're right. The basic structure doctrine is a fascinating and crucial aspect of Indian constitutional law. It essentially says that while Parliament has the power to amend the Constitution, it cannot alter the basic structure of the Constitution.
So there's a core and essence of the Constitution that's untouchable even by Parliament. But what exactly constitutes this basic structure? It seems like a pretty vague concept. Is it clearly defined somewhere?
It's not explicitly defined in the Constitution itself. It's been developed through judicial interpretation over the years, starting with the landmark case of Kasananda Bharati v. State of Kerala in 1973. In this case, the Supreme Court held that Parliament's power to amend the Constitution is not absolute, and that certain fundamental features, which form the basic structure of the Constitution, cannot be altered.
So it's like the courts drew a line in the sand saying, Parliament, you can amend the Constitution, but you can't cross this line. What are some of the things that have been recognized as part of this basic structure?
The list has evolved over time through various Supreme Court judgments, but some key elements include the supremacy of the Constitution, the separation of powers between the executive, legislature, and judiciary, the federal character of the Indian state, the principle of secularism, the democratic form of government, and of course, the framework of fundamental rights itself.
So it's like a set of core principles that form the foundation of the Indian political and legal system. And the courts have said, you can tinker around the edges, but you can't mess with the foundation.
That's a great way to put it. The basic structure doctrine has been hugely influential in safeguarding the core values of the Indian Constitution, and it's been used to strike down constitutional amendments that were deemed to violate this basic structure. It's a testament to the power of judicial review in protecting the essence of the Constitution from being altered in ways that could undermine its fundamental principles.
Wow, that's some serious legal power.
Yeah.
It's amazing how the courts have played such a crucial role in shaping and defending not just fundamental rights, but the very foundation of the Indian Constitution. It's clear that understanding these nuances and the interplay between different branches of government is essential for anyone studying law.
Absolutely. The legal framework is complex, and constantly evolving and understanding these complexities is crucial for interpreting and applying the law effectively. But let's not forget that law is not just an abstract concept. It has real-world implications for people's lives.
Yeah, you're right. We've been focusing a lot on the legal aspects, but it's important to remember that these rights are not just words on paper. They have a tangible impact on the lives of ordinary Indians. How do they actually play out in everyday life?
Yeah, that's a great point. Fundamental rights empower individuals, protect them from abuse, and provide a framework for a just and equitable society. They influence everything from government policies to individual choices shaping the social, political, and economic landscape of India. Think about freedom of speech and expression. This right allows individuals to criticize the government, raise their voices against injustice, and express their views without fear of censorship. It's what allows for open dialogue and debate, which is essential for a healthy democracy.
Without freedom of speech, we wouldn't have that vibrant public discourse that's so crucial for holding those in power accountable and for addressing social issues.
Exactly, and consider the right to equality. This ensures everyone has equal access to public spaces, education, and employment opportunities, regardless of their background. It helps level the playing field and prevents discrimination based on factors like caste, religion, or gender.
It's about ensuring fairness and opportunity for all, regardless of their circumstances. It's about creating a society where everyone has a chance to thrive.
Precisely, and the right to life and personal liberty has been interpreted broadly to include not just physical safety, but also things like the right to privacy, the right to a clean environment, and the right to health care. It recognizes that a life with dignity encompasses a range of factors that allow individuals to live fulfilling lives.
So it's not just about being alive. It's about living a life worth living, a life where basic needs are met and where individuals can enjoy certain freedoms and pursue their aspirations.
Exactly. And the right to constitutional remedies, as we discussed, gives individuals the power to hold the government accountable and fight for their rights if they're violated. It empowers citizens to seek redress through the courts if their fundamental rights are infringed upon.
It's like having a legal safety net, a way to challenge those in power and demand that your rights be respected.
These are just a few examples of how fundamental rights translate into real-world benefits for individuals and for society as a whole. They shape the way we live, the way we interact with each other, and the way we hold our government accountable. They are essential for a just and equitable society.
It's fascinating how these rights, born out of historical struggles and inspired by global ideals, have become so integral to Indian society. But I imagine that no system is perfect, and there are probably criticisms and debates surrounding the framework of fundamental rights in India.
You're absolutely right. There are ongoing discussions and debates about the scope, interpretation, and limitations of these rights. No legal framework is without its flaws or areas where improvement might be needed. One common criticism is that the limitations placed on fundamental rights, those reasonable restrictions we discussed earlier, are sometimes too broad and give the state excessive power to curtail freedoms.
So there's concern that the government can use those restrictions to silence dissent or suppress certain groups under the guise of maintaining order or security.
That's one of the key concerns. Another criticism is that the emphasis on civil and political rights, while important, sometimes overshadows the need for stronger social and economic rights.
So while you might have the right to free speech, that right is less meaningful if you don't have access to basic necessities like food, healthcare, or education. It's like saying you're free to speak your mind, but you're too hungry or sick to do so effectively.
That's a powerful way to put it. There's also the argument that the language used in defining some fundamental rights is too vague and open to interpretation, which can lead to legal battles and uncertainty.
Like the terms public order or morality, those can be pretty subjective. What one person considers immoral, another might see as perfectly acceptable.
Exactly. This lack of clarity can make it difficult for individuals to know the exact boundaries of their rights and for courts to consistently apply these rights in different situations.
And of course, there's the debate surrounding the removal of the right to property
Right.
as a fundamental right. What are your thoughts on that?
It's certainly a significant point of contention. Originally, the right to property was included as a fundamental right under Article 31, but it was later removed through the 44th Amendment in 1978 and made a legal right under Article 300A. This change shifted the balance between individual property rights and the state's ability to acquire property for public purposes.
So while arbitrary seizure of property is still prohibited, the government now has more flexibility in acquiring private property for projects like roads or hospitals if they deem it necessary for public good. This change has undoubtedly had an impact on how individuals can protect their property rights. The rationale behind the amendment was to prioritize social welfare and equitable distribution of resources, suggesting that absolute property rights could hinder these goals. However, it remains a point of debate, as some argue that it weakened the protection of individual property rights.
It's a fascinating example of how political ideologies and evolving societal needs can influence the interpretation and application of rights, highlighting that dynamic nature of the Constitution itself. It's not a static document. It's meant to adapt as India progresses and grapples with new challenges.
Absolutely. Speaking of evolving interpretations, another area that often draws criticism is the provision for preventive detention under Article 22. This provision allows authorities to detain individuals without trial if they're deemed a threat to public order or national security.
Yeah, it's a difficult concept to grapple with. While the intention might be to prevent potential harm, it raises concerns about due process and the potential for abuse. Detaining someone without proving they've committed a crime seems to go against some of those core principles of justice we've been discussing. It's certainly a controversial provision. The Constitution does offer some safeguards, such as limiting the detention period and providing the right to be informed of the grounds for detention and to challenge it. But the fact remains that a significant amount of power rests with the authorities in determining who poses a threat and whether preventive detention is warranted.
It's a delicate balancing act between security and liberty, and one that continues to be debated and scrutinized. It's a reminder that the interpretation and application of fundamental rights are often complex and involve difficult trade-offs.
And that's what makes the study of fundamental rights so fascinating and challenging. It's not just about memorizing articles, it's about understanding how these rights are interpreted, applied, and challenged in a constantly shifting landscape. It's about engaging with the complexities of law society and the very idea of what constitutes a just and equitable system.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into fundamental rights. We've explored the 6 categories, delved into their nuances, and even discussed some of the criticisms and debates surrounding them. It's been an incredibly insightful journey.
We've highlighted how these rights, while fundamental to Indian democracy, are not absolute. They operate within a complex legal framework and are subject to interpretation limitations and ongoing scrutiny. This constant evolution is what keeps the field of constitutional law so dynamic and engaging.
And for you, our listener, this is just the starting point. As you progress in your legal studies, you'll delve deeper into the intricacies of these rights, examine landmark judgments, and perhaps even contribute to the ongoing debates shaping their future.
It's an exciting and ever-evolving field, and remember, understanding these rights is not just about legal knowledge, it's about becoming an active and informed citizen who can uphold these principles and contribute to a more just and equitable society.
Thank you for listening to LexTalks. Follow, subscribe, and stay notified for future episodes.